The sound came first. The deep thrum of helicopter blades cut through the quiet of our neighborhood, rattling windows and shaking the ground beneath our feet. Children on bicycles stopped in the street. Neighbors stepped onto their porches, shielding their eyes against the searchlights sweeping across the cul-de-sac. My family froze in the living room, the laughter from my brother's celebration still hanging in the air when the military convoy roared into view. Black SUVs lined the street in seconds, their engines idling with a low growl. Men and women in uniform moved with practiced precision, their earpieces glinting under the porch lights. Then the helicopter came lower, its downdraft bending the trees and sending loose papers skittering across the lawn. When the side door opened, the officer who stepped out wasn't just any soldier. His gaze swept past everyone, straight to me. He didn't call me Olivia. He didn't use the name my parents gave me or the one my brother always said with a smirk. His voice carried over the rotor wash, calm but sharp as a blade. "Sentinel, it's time." For a moment, no one spoke. My mother clutched the edge of the sofa. My father's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the hardwood floor. The air seemed to collapse around us as my neighbors pulled out their phones, recording the impossible. I stood there, heart pounding, caught between two worlds colliding in plain view. To my family, I was the quiet daughter who worked a safe desk job in the army, someone they never really understood. To the men and women outside, I was something entirely different. They hadn't come for Marcus, with his shiny new company and stock options. They had come for me. My name is Olivia Hayes. I am 29 years old, and I serve as an intelligence analyst in the United States Army. For years, I lived with a secret life behind locked doors and classified files, a world I could never explain at the dinner table. Tonight, the walls between those two lives were ripped away. And if you want to know how the Secretary of Defense ended up sending a helicopter to my parents' front yard, you have to understand where my story really begins. The night of my brother's party was supposed to be about him, and it was. Marcus had just taken his startup public, and the whole neighborhood seemed to be in my parents' living room, raising glasses to his success. The air smelled of catered food and expensive champagne, the kind of celebration my parents had always dreamed of. I stood near the back wall, half in the shadows, trying to make myself smaller. I had been to enough of these nights to know my role. Marcus held court in the center of the room, his smile wide, his voice booming as he thanked investors, mentors, and of course, our parents for their endless support. Then his eyes found me. I could see the flicker of amusement before he lifted his glass a little higher. "And let's not forget my little sister Olivia," he said, drawing the room's attention. "Still holding down that army desk job. Someone's got to shuffle the paperwork that keeps America safe, right?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in the way of bullies, but it was sharp enough to sting. It rolled over me like a wave I had no way to block. My father chuckled as he reached out and patted my arm. "We're just happy you're safe, honey," he added, his tone carrying that familiar weight of dismissal. "No more combat boots, no more dusty bases overseas. A steady desk and a paycheck. That's what matters." My mother chimed in with a smile that looked sympathetic on the surface, but carried the same undertone. "Exactly. No need to scare us with dangerous missions. Marcus has the spotlight now, and you can relax." Their words were meant as comfort, but they cut deeper than any insult could. I forced a small smile, nodding as if the joke hadn't reached me. Inside, though, the ledger in my mind ticked forward, another entry added to years of being minimized. They thought I was fragile. They thought I had stepped away from the fight. They believed the stories I let them believe, the ones where I was just another paper pusher buried in endless reports. No one there knew the cost of the hours I worked, the weight of the intelligence I handled, or the nights I sat in silence, knowing lives depended on a single decision I made. The toasts went on, champagne flutes clinking as Marcus soaked in the praise. I stayed where I was, my hands tight around a glass of water I hadn't touched. The celebration swelled around me, and I felt like a ghost at my own family's table. My brother's grin widened as his friends slapped him on the back, while my parents glowed with pride, basking in the reflection of his success. Every laugh reminded me that I was invisible in their eyes, a supporting character in a story they had already written. What hurt the most wasn't Marcus's joke. It was how natural it felt for everyone else to laugh. It was the way my parents agreed without hesitation. How easily they brushed me aside for the brighter star in the room. They had no idea that in that same moment, I was carrying a truth none of them could have imagined. I let the moment pass, swallowing the burn in my chest, outwardly calm, inwardly bruised. They had no idea what it meant to be me, and one day they would. Holidays were always the same. Thanksgiving dinners with the table overflowing, Christmas mornings filled with wrapping paper and noise, and every family event circling back to Marcus. He was the golden child, the one everyone wanted to hear from, while I filled the quiet spaces, helping in the kitchen or slipping out of the way so I didn't look like I was competing. It was easier that way, even if it left me with the same hollow ache each time. I remember his wedding like it happened yesterday. The entire night felt like a stage show, my parents glowing as they introduced him to every guest as their proudest accomplishment. I stood beside them, smiling when asked, holding bouquets, and watching as they clapped him on the back with endless praise. When I finally found a moment to share something of my own, I mentioned softly that I had received the Bronze Star Medal for my last deployment. My words barely settled in the air before my mother's head tilted, and she interrupted with a cheerful, "That's lovely, dear. Marcus, tell us more about how you and Anna met." The conversation shifted instantly. The medal brushed aside as if it were nothing more than a trinket. My father didn't even look up. I sat there with my drink, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes, as the people I had risked everything to make proud turned away without a second thought. The Bronze Star weighed heavy in my pocket that night, not from its metal, but from what it represented. To me, it was sacrifice, long nights, and lives saved. To them, it was a distraction from Marcus's love story. Moments like that stacked up over the years. At birthdays, anniversaries, and family holidays, I learned to stay quiet. I listened, I nodded, I laughed when they laughed, but I always felt like a shadow in my own home. They celebrated Marcus because his path was easy to understand, while mine was something they neither wanted nor tried to grasp. I told myself I was fine with it, that their blindness didn't matter. Still, each dismissal left a mark, a quiet reminder that in my family's world, I was always standing outside the circle. Inside the Pentagon, the world was nothing like the one my family imagined. The walls were lined with screens that glowed with maps, data streams, and real-time intelligence. The air carried the quiet hum of urgency, every person in that room carrying the weight of decisions that could alter the safety of millions. I was not Olivia, the overlooked daughter. In that space, I was Sentinel. One meeting in particular still lives sharp in my memory. A classified briefing about Pacific Command had gathered senior officers, analysts, and generals. The system under review was supposed to be impenetrable, a cornerstone of our national defense. As the presentation moved forward, my eyes caught a detail buried in the code, a handshake protocol that didn't look right. I traced it quickly, and a chill ran through me. If exploited, that flaw could cut communications across the entire Pacific theater, leaving our forces blind in less than 10 minutes. I raised my voice, steady but firm, and pointed it out. The room went silent. A dozen pairs of eyes turned to me, some skeptical, others alarmed. I explained how the vulnerability could be used, walking through the sequence line by line. No one else had caught it, not even the contractors who had built the system. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough for me to wonder if they understood. Then the commanding general leaned forward, his jaw tight, his voice carrying weight. "You're right. Without you, we would never have seen this. Sentinel, you just saved the Pacific." There was no laughter in that room. No dismissive pats or quick changes of subject. Only recognition, sharp and unflinching. At home, I was invisible. In the Pentagon, I was indispensable. That contrast defined me, even if my family never knew. The party was still buzzing when my phone vibrated, in a way that stopped my breath. It wasn't a normal notification. not a call or a text. It was the kind of coded pulse I had been trained to recognize instantly, a rhythm that split my world in half. I pulled the small, secure device from my pocket and saw the words that only a handful of people in the country would ever read. Protocol Iron Shield. Level 1 activation. The chatter of Marcus's friends blurred into the background as I opened the encrypted message. My pulse steadied, not quickened. Iron Shield wasn't a drill. It was a last resort extraction order for an irreplaceable asset. In that moment, every petty laugh and dismissive comment from earlier faded away. The only thing that mattered was the choice in front of me. The system asked for confirmation of my location. Andrews Air Force Base was listed as the default. 30 minutes, and I would disappear. No one the wiser. The second option glowed. Just below it. Primary residence. I stared at the words. The logical move was Andrews. Clean, efficient, discreet. But logic isn't the same as truth. My family's ignorance had always been a private wound. One I carried quietly. Tonight, it was more than that. Their blind confidence that I was small, that I was safe, and insignificant, was not just insulting, it was dangerous. People like them didn't understand the world I worked in, but they had always believed their version of me. That belief could no longer exist. I pressed my thumb to the screen and chose home. Not out of anger, not out of revenge. Revenge is messy, emotional. This was precise. A correction, a necessary collision between the world they thought I lived in and the one I actually did. My confirmation was logged in seconds, the device buzzing again with a terse acknowledgement. Extraction in progress. Estimated arrival, 14 minutes. The room carried on without noticing. Laughter bouncing off the walls. Champagne glasses clinking. I sat perfectly still, my face calm, my heart steady. My mother leaned over to ask Marcus another question about his company, oblivious to the countdown ticking silently in my hand. My father chuckled at some investor's joke. I looked at them one by one, and a cold clarity settled over me. They would finally see me, not as a background character, not as a failed soldier hiding in paperwork, but as the person the Pentagon could not afford to lose. I excused myself quietly, walking down the hall to my childhood bedroom. The posters on the walls were faded, relics of a girl my parents thought they knew. I sat on the bed, staring at the alert again. Protocol Iron Shield. I whispered the words under my breath, letting them anchor me. This was the firewall coming down, the two halves of my life about to collide in front of everyone who had ever doubted me. When the blades of the helicopter finally shook the roof, I didn't flinch. I had chosen this, and in less than a minute, they would understand exactly who I was. The first sign was the low rumble that shook the windows. Then came the flashing lights bouncing off the walls, red and blue mixing with the yellow glow of the porch lamps. Conversations inside faltered as people turned toward the sound. When the front door opened, the entire street was swallowed by the presence of military vehicles. Black trucks and armored SUVs blocked both ends of the road, their headlights cutting through the dark like a stage spotlight. Soldiers stepped out in unison, boots hitting the pavement with a rhythm that left no room for doubt. Neighbors spilled out onto their lawns, phones raised, capturing every second as if they were watching a scene from a movie. Uniformed men and women spread across the street, rifles slung but ready, eyes scanning every angle. My father stiffened, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Marcus, never one to shy away from being the loudest in the room, squared his shoulders and stormed toward the porch, ready to demand answers. He stopped cold when he caught sight of the emblem stamped on the side of the lead vehicle, the seal of the United States Department of Defense. The air shifted. No one laughed, no one spoke. The weight of authority was too heavy. From the convoy, a tall officer in full-dress uniform stepped forward, his stride steady and deliberate. He didn't glance at Marcus, or at my stunned parents, or at the crowd whispering around us. His eyes locked straight on me. When he spoke, his voice carried over the hum of engines and the buzzing whispers. Calm, but absolute. Sentinel, The Secretary of Defense needs you immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating. My brother's mouth hung open, words failing him for the first time in his life. My parents turned toward me, their faces pale, caught between confusion and fear. Every camera phone in the neighborhood was aimed at me now. For years, I had been invisible to them, the quiet sister with the boring job. In that single moment, the truth stood undeniable under the floodlights. Marcus was the first to break. His champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the hardwood with a sound that cut through the silence. The golden boy of the family stood frozen, his confidence stripped away in an instant, replaced by shock that left him speechless. Around him, the whispers of neighbors swelled, a chorus of disbelief rising into the night air. My mother's hand clutched at my father's sleeve, her face pale and trembling. My father, who had always dismissed my work as harmless paperwork, looked at me as though seeing a stranger for the first time. Their world, the one built on Marcus's success and my supposed insignificance, crumbled right there on the porch. The people who had believed I was small, safe, and replaceable now stared at me with fear and awe. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I let the silence hold, heavy and undeniable, until I finally spoke. I have to go to work. The words landed with the weight of a hammer. No defense. No justification. Only truth. I turned, walked past Marcus's stunned expression, past my parents' wide eyes, and stepped into the waiting formation of uniformed officers. Behind me, their reality collapsed. Every laugh, every dismissal, every joke at my expense shattered like Marcus's glass on the floor. I didn't look back. The image of their faces, pale and broken under the floodlights, was burned into my memory. In that moment, the balance of our family shifted forever. For the first time, they knew exactly who I was, and there was no way to unsee it. A week later, I stood in the Situation Room. The walls lined with screens displaying maps and streams of intelligence that never stopped moving. The air was heavy with decisions that shaped nations, the kind of atmosphere where every word carried consequences. I had been in secure rooms before, but this one felt different. This was the nerve center of the country, and I was at the center of it. The Secretary of Defense sat at the head of the long table, his presence commanding even in silence. Generals and advisors filled the room, their faces drawn with the weight of the crisis we had just endured. I briefed them on the vulnerability I had uncovered, the same flaw that could have crippled our Pacific defenses if it had gone unnoticed. My voice stayed steady, my explanations clear, and when I finished, the room was quiet. Not the quiet of doubt, the quiet of respect. The secretary leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine. "This nation owes you more than it can ever repay," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the full authority of his office. Then he said my name, not Sentinel, not a call sign. Olivia Hayes. The sound of it hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of my work, it was recognition of me, the person behind the role, the daughter who had been overlooked for so long. For the first time, I felt the ledger I had carried inside me begin to dissolve. Years of being dismissed, minimized, and overlooked seemed to lose their weight in that single moment. They didn't see me as a desk clerk or a background character. They saw me as essential, as someone whose actions had protected the very fabric of our defense. I walked out of the Situation Room that night, knowing the truth I had always carried was finally visible, even if only in the eyes of those who understood its weight. I didn't need applause from my family or validation from those who never cared to understand. The recognition I received here was real, and it was enough to remind me of the worth I had known deep down all along. For the first time in years, I felt not just respected, but seen. The first message from Marcus came late at night. My phone buzzed on the desk beside a stack of classified reports, the glow of the screen pulling my eyes away from lines of intelligence updates. His name stared back at me, the same brother who had always laughed at my work, who had turned me into the punchline of his toasts. "Olivia, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I'm proud of you. Truly." The words were longer than I had ever seen him write, filled with guilt, softened by regret. I read them once, then again, waiting for the familiar ache to rise in me, but it never came. There was no anger, no satisfaction, no need to reply. Just quiet distance. I held my finger over the screen for a moment before tapping archive. The message disappeared into the digital silence, no longer mine to carry. I realized then that I didn't need his validation, or anyone else's, in my family. My worth had already been proven in the places where it mattered most. For the first time, I felt completely free. All my life, my family thought they knew what a real job looked like. They wanted something they could point to, something that made sense to neighbors and friends, something simple to explain at parties. What they never understood was that my real job was protecting the very ground they stood on, even if they never saw it. The truth is, not every sacrifice comes with applause. Not every accomplishment shines in a way that others will notice. Sometimes the most important work is the work no one ever knows about, the kind that carries weight in silence. I had to learn that my value was never measured by their understanding, but by the difference I made in the world. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Your worth is not defined by how others label you. It's defined by the courage, dedication, and heart you bring to what you do, even when no one else recognizes it. So let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated and wanted to prove your true value?